Today you will be learning about chemical equations and the law of conservation of mass, or law of conservation of matter. You are going to read the section and annotate it. Make sure you know what reactants are, products are, and that you understand the law of conservation of mass or matter. The law of conservation of mass or matter is also discussed here, and it explains the warm-ups that we had about the seedlings as well as the ice cubes in the bag. So I'm going to start with you here because this is a little confusing. What you're going to do on the activities on page 77 and 78 have to do and make sure that you understand these steps. It says use the information listed under materials for each activity you performed in part 1 to identify the chemical formula for the substances you used in chemical changes. Write those formulas under the column reactants in the chart below. Use a plus sign between the reactants to indicate the chemicals that were mixed together in a reaction. So what I'm going to do is you're going to flip back to page 70 under activity A, and it shows here that I use steel wool and copper sulfate. So those are what my reactants are for activity A. So I'm going to write here that I used the iron, that was the steel wool, plus the copper sulfate. And when I combine those two things, a chemical reaction occurs. So I now have iron sulfate plus copper. And I look at activity B, and here I have the copper sulfate and the magnesium ribbon. So those are my reactants. So I have the copper sulfate plus magnesium. When I added those together, a reaction took place, and I now have magnesium sulfate and the copper again. If you go to page 72, this was with the hydrogen peroxide, and I mixed it with the yeast, and the balloon blew up. So here it's a little bit different. I had 2 molecules of the H2O2, which is the hydrogen peroxide, and it mixed with the yeast. And that gave me 2 molecules of H2O plus the gas of oxygen. The last one is a little complicated. Here I had the copper sulfate, and you added the drops of ammonia to it. And this is how you write that formula. Again, I had 2 molecules of NH4OH plus the copper sulfate, and then that yielded, and this is where we've added our parentheses now. I have NH4 parentheses 2 SO4 plus copper parentheses OH parentheses 2. So now you'll use this information here to count your elements. Make sure you understand the law of conservation of mass by reading this. And this is the example that they have. They're going to show what were your elements in the reactants, what are your elements in the products, and then say whether the law of conservation was met. And then you're going to do the same for the other 3. You're going to list your elements in your products, and whether the law of conservation was met for that one and this one as well. And now you should know how to do the parentheses and counting, and I would like you to do both of the application questions. Okay, thank you. Be good for your sub.